Hello to my stitching friends. Well, I'm back today to give you an update on my latest project that I've been working on. This is called Sad Fairy by Heaven and Earth Designs, and I started this I think about a week ago, so I haven't really got very far. It does take a while to get into it, so there isn't very much here at the moment, but you know, every stitch counts. So let's have a look a little bit more at this pattern. Now I have this parking method that I'm using along here. So what I'm doing is I'm working in blocks of 20 by 20. Now usually what I do is I have the easy count gridded fabric, which is the grey grid, and it's covered in 10 by 10 squares, but they didn't have that at the stockist that I usually buy from, so I thought, well, this one will be just as good. So it's still gridded and it's actually in 20 by 20 squares. I don't really notice too much difference in the fabric itself. Actually, I like this one because I find that the red grid is actually easier to see than the grey one that I was using before. The only thing was getting used to the 20 by 20 as opposed to the 10 by 10. So one of the things I had to do was decide whereabouts in this red square I was to put my first stitch, because this red line goes over 2 stitches. So what I did was I started on the inner stitch, that there'll always be a red border around each square, and that's just one thing. As long as you remember that, you'll not have a problem. Now these red squares, these red grids will wash off eventually, and I was worried about that, so I tested it and I washed a little corner of this fabric, and I found that it did indeed wash off quite easily, so there's nothing to worry about there. So yeah, it was a bit touch and go to begin with because I wasn't used to it, but once I did get into it, there wasn't a problem at all. So what does this pattern actually look like when it's finished? I think it looks really pretty. Now I found that I thought that the greys were going to be very sort of blackish grey, but since I've started this, they seem to have a lovely sort of bluish and purpley colour to them, so that's really nice, and I like that. It does add some definition, and there hasn't been too much confetti at all in this top area. It's been actually relatively confetti free. So, you know, every time I do a block, I think to myself, God, that's taken me ages, but then I have to remind myself that I've actually done 400 stitches as opposed to just the 100 that you would do in a normal little square. That's how it's coming along, and I really think it's going to be fine. I did at one point think about trying a diagonal stitch, but as I'm doing 10th stitch, I wasn't sure how to do it, and I didn't want to make a mess of it, so I think I'm going to practice that first on a scrap piece of fabric and see how it comes out. And if it works for me, great, and if it doesn't, I'll just stick to the method that I'm doing, which at the moment is fine. I did have an issue with starting, and I've tried what they call the pin stitch start, and I haven't been able to work that one out on 25 count, so I'll have to look into that again. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm just starting a thread with a knot at the front of the canvas, and then cutting it off later when I've covered some of the threads. It's kind of difficult to describe, but there are plenty of tutorials on there about how to start your threads and how to finish your threads. The other thing I found was that the red grid was showing through a little bit, and that I was thinking, well, why is that happening? But it's probably because the stitches are lighter up here, and once you get into the dark stitches it won't be so pronounced. But again, you have to remember that it's going to wash out at the end of the day. So I'm going to continue moving along this way. Now this constitutes a page in the Heaven and Earth chart, so I may just do one page and then go along here and do another page, and then maybe move again to the right. I've realised I'm not actually going to get to this lovely fairy until about a third of the page down, so there's just going to be a lot of sky and tree and flower until then. so I'm going to have to bear with that, unless I started at the bottom or in the middle, which I never start. So I do want to get as much of this lovely pattern done as I can in the coming week. I am rotating it with a couple of other things, so sometimes what irritates me is that I want to be doing all of them at the same time, which, as you know, is impossible. So it's a matter of designating what time I'm going to spend on each, and also you know, there has to come a time where you need a bit of rest and you have to do other things like housework, family, a little bit of other pleasurable pursuits. I like reading, and I think that, you know, I've gotten so into this cross stitching in the last while that I may as well just throw my books in the bin, because I'm not getting around to reading them. By the time I go to bed, I'm too exhausted from doing cross stitch. So I think that, you know, I'm going to have to try and organize my time a little bit better. But once you get started, you get really into the flow, and then it's hard to stop, which is one of the other things. I don't suppose it's a bad thing. I suppose it's just best to do what you want when you want, but other things can get neglected. So yeah, how long is this going to take me? Well, I calculated on 200 stitches a day. It's probably going to take me a couple of years or even 3 years. So, but you know, I don't like to just sit down and say I'm going to do exactly this amount. I'll just do what I feel like I can do, and maybe do some of a different pattern. You know, it really, I don't want it to feel like it's something I have to do, because if it starts to feel like I have to do something, I end up abandoning it. So I'd rather just leave things to desire, basically. But at the end of the day, there is a lot that I want to get finished. So, you know, it's really just a balance. It's about balance. So what do you think of this pattern? I think it's going to come out lovely. I've seen a completed pattern done by somebody else, and I think it looks lovely. So I'm working on this 25 count fabric, and I actually don't see myself changing that anytime soon. I find it a comfortable count to work on. I have thought about working on 28 count, but the holes just seem a little bit too small for my comfort. I've seen people doing a lot of heaven and earth designs on rotation, so I'd be interested to find out how you manage those. I do have one other heaven and earth design that I pulled out of a cupboard, which I put away last year, and I thought I'd like to try and do that one as well. So yeah, you know, just piling it all on top of my head. So I've had another go with that one, mostly just to see the comparison between it and this one. So how do you manage yours? Do you have more than 2 on the go? Do you have several, or do you just stick to the one heaven and earth design at a time, which seems more sensible? But you know, some people just love to rotate, they love to have the variation, and I totally understand that. I do get tired of doing the same one after a couple of days, and I do want to switch to try something else, something that has different colors, something that has a different method, a different challenge. So yeah, I suppose it all depends on your character and what it is that's most comfortable for you. What do you get enjoyment out of? If it becomes too stressful, then obviously it's not going to last. So I'd be interested to hear about that. So that's really my update for today, and if there's anything else you'd like to know, just pop me a message in the comments section. I'd also like to hear what you think of the pattern. What do you think of this Magic Guide fabric, if you've used it before? What sort of fabric do you use for your heaven and earth designs? So I hope you have a wonderful stitching week, and I'll catch up with you again very soon. Take care.